the moment my husband told me to either sign over my half of the business or find somewhere else to sleep. I understood something that took me almost 8 years to see clearly. He never once believed I would actually walk away. That's the part nobody tells you about ultimatums. The person delivering them almost never means it as a real choice. They mean it as a wall. Something to back you into. Something to make you feel so small and so trapped that the only thing left to do is surrender. I didn't surrender. My name is Leah, and I was 36 years old when my husband handed me what he thought was a punishment, and what turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. We had been together for 10 years, married for 7 of them. We had a daughter named Piper who was 5 at the time and thought her father hung the moon. We had a house in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, with a finished basement and a vegetable garden. I spent 3 summers getting right, and we had a business, a small but genuinely profitable event catering company that I had built from scratch before my husband ever came into the picture. I want to be clear about that part because it matters. The business was mine first. I started it at 24 with $8,000 I had saved from waitressing and a secondhand commercial oven I found on Craigslist. I named it after my grandmother. I spent years developing vendor relationships, building a client list, doing every single delivery myself in a secondhand van that broke down twice a year like clockwork. By the time I met my husband, the company was already turning a real profit. He joined the company 3 years into our marriage. After the bakery he managed closed down and he needed work. I brought him in. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. Not trusting him as a husband. Trusting him as a partner in something I should have protected more carefully. Over the years, his role grew. Not because the business needed him to take over, but because I kept saying yes when I should have said no. Yes, you can handle the vendor contracts. Yes, you can be on the business account. Yes, your name can be on the LLC. Each yes felt like generosity at the time. Each one felt like building something together. But something shifted around year 5 of our marriage. He started referring to the company differently. Not your business or even our business. Just the business. Like it had always been a shared thing. Like the years I spent building it before he arrived had simply been erased. His mother noticed that shift and encouraged it. I don't think she ever liked me. Not in a dramatic movie villain kind of way. It was quieter than that. She was the kind of woman who smiled warmly while delivering insults she later claimed were jokes. She thought I was too focused on work, too independent. She once told my husband, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, that a woman who puts her career first makes a difficult wife. I came out of the kitchen, set down the dish towel I was holding, and told her I disagreed. She looked at me like I had said something shocking, and then turned to my husband and raised both eyebrows as if to say, "See what I mean?" He laughed it off. He always laughed it off. That became the pattern. She would say something cutting. I would respond calmly. He would smooth it over like it was nothing. Over time, I started staying quiet instead, because speaking up only ever made me look like the difficult one. What I didn't realize was that staying quiet felt like agreement to everyone but me. The confrontation that broke everything open happened on a Sunday evening in April. We were having dinner at his parents' house, which happened often because his mother preferred that everyone come to her rather than her going anywhere. His father was a quiet man who mostly watched sports and nodded at whatever his wife said. His sister, whose name was Gwen, was 2 years younger than him, and had always treated me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Dinner was fine, until my husband mentioned that we'd been approached by a hotel group interested in a long-term catering contract. It was a significant opportunity. I had been quietly negotiating it for 6 weeks. I was proud of it. His mother immediately asked how much it was worth. I gave a general answer. She pressed for specifics. My husband filled in the numbers before I could redirect the conversation, which annoyed me but wasn't unusual. Then his sister said, "So what does that mean for the restructuring?" I looked at my husband. He looked at the table. "What restructuring?" I asked. There was a pause. The kind of pause that tells you a conversation has been happening somewhere you weren't invited. "We've just been talking," he said carefully, "about how the business might need new structure as it grows. To protect both of us." "Protect both of us how?" His mother folded her napkin very precisely. "Leah, the company has grown significantly. It might make sense for things to be held differently, more formally." I kept my voice even. "It's already held formally. I'm the majority owner. That's in the operating agreement." "For now," his sister said, and then looked at her wine glass like she hadn't said anything. I turned to my husband. "Have you been talking to a lawyer about this?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I just had one conversation," he said. "An exploratory thing." I set down my fork. "About restructuring ownership of a company I founded without telling me?" His mother made a sound that was almost a sigh. "There you go." That was all she said. "There you go." Like my question was already proof of some personality defect she'd been cataloging for years. I asked what that meant. She said, "Every time anything comes up, Leah, you make it adversarial. We're a family." His sister nodded. His father stared at the centerpiece. My husband looked at the space between us and said nothing. And something inside me recognized that silence as the most honest thing he'd shown me all evening. The drive home was quiet. Piper had fallen asleep in her car seat 20 minutes into the trip. My husband kept his eyes on the road. I waited until we were inside and Piper was in bed before I asked him directly what was going on. He said he thought the company should be restructured as a 50-50 partnership, that it was only fair, given how much he'd contributed over the past 4 years, that his name was already on everything anyway. So really, it was just about making things official. I told him his name was on some accounts because I trusted him, not because he had earned equal ownership. He said that was insulting. I said it was accurate. The argument went back and forth for 2 hours. I was careful. I was calm. I explained my position with full sentences and reasonable points. He got louder. I got quieter. Eventually, he said something I had never heard him say in 7 years of marriage. "Sign the amended agreement, or I want you out of this house." I looked at him for a long moment. The house was, technically, in both our names, which meant he couldn't remove me from it any more than I could remove him. But I understood what he meant. He meant he was done. He meant this was his line. I said, "Let me think about it." He thought that meant he was winning. It meant I needed 72 hours. I didn't sleep that night. Not much. I lay next to him in the bed we had shared for 7 years and stared at the ceiling and ran through every version of every option I had. And at some point around 3 in the morning, I stopped asking what I should do and started asking what I would actually be willing to live with. The answer was simple. I was not willing to give away what I had built. Not because I was greedy, not because I wanted to punish him, but because doing so would mean accepting that the last 12 years of my life, the savings, the secondhand oven, the van, the breakdowns, the early mornings, had been something I held only temporarily, something that could be renegotiated once I'd made it worth taking. I was not going to accept that. I called my attorney the next morning while my husband was at a vendor meeting. Her name was Rosalind, and she had been my business attorney since I first incorporated. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said 3 things. She said I was right, that he could not compel me to alter the operating agreement. She said that depending on how certain accounts had been used, there might be exposure I needed to address quickly. And she said I needed to think carefully about what outcome I actually wanted, because that would determine every step from here. I thought about it for the rest of that afternoon. And then I started making calls. What happened over the next 4 weeks? Nobody in my husband's family saw coming, which was exactly how I needed it. The first call was to a business consultant I'd worked with years earlier, before I was married, when I was still figuring out how to scale the company. He was methodical and discreet, and when I explained what was happening, he helped me think through a restructuring of my own. Not the kind my husband had in mind. The kind that clearly, legally, and thoroughly documented the origin and ownership of every asset. The second call was to my accountant. She pulled 4 years of financial records and prepared a complete valuation that traced every contribution to the business. It took her 11 days. When she sent me the final document, I sat with it for a long time. My contribution in documented terms was not 60% or 70%. It was 91%. My husband's financial contribution amounted to labor that had been compensated through his salary, which I had agreed to and paid consistently. He had never invested capital. He had never brought in a major client. He had managed operations well, and I had paid him fairly for that. The third call was to a real estate attorney, because I needed to understand exactly what I was looking at in terms of the house. And in between all of these calls, I woke Piper up every morning, made her oatmeal with the brown sugar she liked on top, drove her to kindergarten, picked her up, gave her baths, read her stories about a family of rabbits who lived in a hollow tree, and tucked her in. I smiled at my husband over dinner. I asked about his day. I did not argue. I did not bring up the business agreement. I let him believe that I was processing. He interpreted my silence as softening. I had learned by then that silence is a language people hear the way they want to. 3 weeks in, the hotel contract finalized. I signed it under my name alone, as the majority owner, which was entirely within my rights under the existing operating agreement. It was the largest contract in the company's history. I told my husband about it that evening. I watched his face cycle through surprise, excitement, and then something else. A recognition that this contract, under current ownership structure, was primarily mine. He brought up the amended agreement again that night. I told him I was still thinking. The following weekend, his parents hosted a birthday party for his father, turning 70. It was at a rented venue, not mine, with catering handled by another company, which my mother-in-law had specifically chosen, a detail I noticed and decided to find funny rather than insulting. The whole family was there. Cousins, aunts, old family friends, neighbors. Piper wore a yellow dress she had picked herself and spent most of the party following the family dog around the room. After dinner, while dessert was being cleared, my mother-in-law stood up and gave a toast. It was about legacy, about building things that last, about family being the foundation of everything real. She looked at her son when she said that last part. Gwen leaned over to me and said, almost pleasantly, "You know, eventually you're going to have to decide whether you're part of this family or just adjacent to it." I turned and looked at her directly. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "It means a partnership is a partnership. In marriage, in business. Holding things back doesn't exactly say team, does it?" Before I could answer, my husband appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and said, "We're working through it." He was talking to his sister. Not to me. I looked at him, the way you look at someone when you are deciding something and you need to be certain. And I realized I was certain. I had been certain for almost a week. I had just been waiting for a moment to confirm it. That moment was now. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, smiled at both of them, and said, "You're right. A partnership is a partnership." Then I walked across the room to sit with Piper and the family dog, and I didn't bring it up again for the rest of the evening. 3 days later, I filed the paperwork, not to give him more ownership, to formally document and protect mine. Rosalind had prepared everything. The valuation, the documented contribution history, a formal notice that no amendments to the operating agreement would be made without mutual written consent and independent legal review. Everything was filed correctly, transparently, and completely within the law. I sent copies to both our attorneys. The morning he found out, he called me 4 times before 9 a.m. I answered the 4th call. "What did you do?" he said. I told him I had protected the business I built. He said I was being vindictive. I told him I was being careful. He said his attorney had told him there was nothing he could do about it. I told him I already knew that. There was a long silence on the line, the kind I had learned to wait out. "What is happening to us?" he said, and for the first time, he sounded less angry than genuinely lost. I thought about that question for a moment. Then I said, "You tried to take something I built and called it fairness. And when I didn't agree, You threatened me instead of talking to me. That's what happened to us." He was quiet. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "But I'm not signing anything that gives away what I built before you were part of my life." He said he needed time. I told him I thought that was reasonable. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that. Piper knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't name it. She started climbing into bed with me at night, which she hadn't done since she was 3. I let her. I held her and listened to her breathe and reminded myself that what I was doing was not just for me. My husband and I had long conversations that we should have been having for years. He admitted that his mother had been pushing the restructuring idea for almost a year before he brought it to me. He admitted he had known it wasn't entirely fair. He admitted that somewhere along the way, he had started seeing the business as something we shared equally, and when I didn't see it that way, he had felt diminished. That was hard to hear, because I understood it. I just couldn't let it change the facts. His mother called me twice. Both calls were brief and not particularly warm. She said she hoped I understood what I was doing to the family. I told her I hoped she understood what she had put into motion. That was the end of the second call. Gwen sent a long text about loyalty and what it really means. I read it once and set my phone face down. His father, the quiet man who had spent 30 years nodding along, called me one evening and said simply that he was sorry things had gotten this way. It was the most unexpected call of the whole ordeal. I thanked him. The hotel contract launched in September. I hired 2 additional staff members. The business, operating under clear and documented ownership, moved into its strongest quarter since I had started it. There was something almost clarifying about that. My husband and I are still working through what we are now. I won't wrap that up neatly, because it isn't neat. He has started seeing a therapist, which I think is genuinely good. We are not separated, but we are not the same as we were before. I don't know what that means for the long term. I'm trying to stay honest about that uncertainty instead of pretending I have it figured out. What I know is this: Piper is doing well. She is in 1st grade now and has decided her favorite thing is making up stories about animals who solve problems. She tells them to me at bedtime, and they are usually about someone who got stuck somewhere and figured out how to get unstuck. I don't think she knows what that means to me. Maybe someday I'll tell her. I know that the business I started at 24 with $8,000 and a secondhand oven is still mine. I know that I spent years being quiet to keep the peace, and when I finally acted instead of argued, everything changed. And I know what the real turning point was. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the hotel contract. It wasn't even the moment he gave me the ultimatum. It was the moment I stopped being afraid that protecting myself would make people uncomfortable. That was the moment everything shifted. The night my husband told me to sign or get out. He thought he was drawing a line. He didn't realize I had already drawn mine.